I stood at the hotel entrance clutching the small velvet box that held my gift. My only son, Mark, adjusted his tie, looked me dead in the eyes, and said words I never thought I would hear in this lifetime. "Dad, I'm sorry. You weren't invited. Go away." His bride lingered behind him, eyes, sharp lips curved in a polite smile that felt like a knife. For a moment, the laughter and music from the ballroom faded into silence. 58 years of sacrifice, of oil-stained hands building a life from a garage of nights alone after my wife died, all of it dismissed in a single breath. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I only nodded and walked away. What he didn't know was that in just a few minutes, the entire wedding would collapse. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The box in my hand felt heavier than it should have. Inside was a silver watch engraved with his initials. A piece of me, a fragment of my past meant to pass down. I had spent nights choosing it, thinking of the day he would look at it and remember where he came from. Now it was just metal and memory rejected before it was even opened. I moved slowly through the lobby, past the polished marble floors and towering floral arrangements that I had paid for without anyone knowing. My shoes echoed against the tiles, each step sharp in my ears. The guests didn't notice me at first, wrapped up in their chatter and champagne flutes. But then the whispers started. Heads tilted. I caught fragments. "Isn't that the groom's father? Why does he look so out of place?" I didn't belong in their world. Mark had made sure of that. The air outside felt colder even though it was late spring. I stood by the line of luxury cars gleaming under the evening lights, my own aging sedan tucked at the far edge of the lot like a secret. For a moment I considered leaving the gift on the hood of his rented limousine. A last gesture, quiet and invisible the way I had been living in his life for years. But something inside me hardened. No, he had asked me to go away. He would get exactly that. I slid into my car and closed the door, shutting out the hotel's noise. The steering wheel was warm from the sun, familiar beneath my palms, unlike anything else tonight. My chest ached, not with the sharp pain of anger, but with the heavy dullness of recognition. I had known for years that Mark was ashamed of me, of where he came from. But to hear it confirmed in front of her, in front of strangers, it cut deeper than any wrench or blade ever could. The engine hummed to life. I didn't drive away immediately. I sat there staring at the envelope on the passenger seat. Inside was a check, a significant one. Enough for a honeymoon, a down payment on a home, or perhaps both. My final gift as a father who had already given too much. My hand hovered over it, then pulled back. Let it sit, let it breathe. Traffic lights blurred as I drove back toward my house. Wilmington streets were familiar to me, every crack in the pavement, every rusted sign. I had lived here my whole life. Built a garage here, fixed cars with these hands until my knuckles were scarred and my nails stained permanently black. When my wife Ellen passed away, I had poured myself into that shop to keep from falling apart. Mark was just a boy then. He used to run around the garage, climbing into car seats, pretending to steer. I remember wiping sweat off my brow and laughing, thinking this kid will grow up knowing the value of hard work. But college had changed him. New friends, new suits, a world that had no space for grease under fingernails. He came back each holiday with less time for me and more excuses. I told myself it was just growing up, that it was normal, that maybe he would circle back when he was older. I believed it for years. Until tonight. By the time I reached home, the street was quiet. The maple trees lining the sidewalk swayed gently, their shadows long under the street lamps. My house stood still and steady, the white fence chipped in places I'd been meaning to repair. I parked in the driveway and just sat for a while. The silence pressed in, reminding me that every sacrifice, every late night, every dollar I had tucked away had led to this moment. A father turned away at his own son's wedding. I placed the velvet box on the kitchen table when I went inside. It looked small there, out of place amid the clutter of newspapers and unopened mail. I pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. The ticking of the old wall clock filled the room, each second carving deeper into my resolve. I stared at the photographs lining the mantel, Mark as a baby in Ellen's arms. Mark at 10, beaming with his first baseball glove. Mark at 18 shaking my hand after graduation. My wife's smile beside him frozen forever. When had I become invisible to him? When had I turned into something he needed to erase? My eyes fell on a folder tucked beneath a pile of papers. Contracts, receipts, the details of the wedding I had quietly funded, banquet hall deposit catering decorations, photography line after line, each signed by me. A secret I had kept because I thought he would never accept it if he knew. Pride, I told myself. He wanted to appear independent, successful, self-made. I let him have that illusion, even if it meant erasing myself from the picture. But illusions crack, and tonight his entire world would feel that fracture. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Richard, my financial advisor. His name sat there like an unopened door. I hesitated. My thumb hovered, then pressed. He answered quickly, his tone warm and professional. "Edward, good evening. Everything all right?" I drew in a long breath. "Richard, I need to ask you something. Hypothetically, if I wanted to stop several large payments, wedding-related expenses scheduled to finalize tonight and tomorrow, could it be done?" There was a pause on the line, the sound of typing in the background. Technically, yes. As long as the payments haven't fully cleared, they can be stopped. But, Edward, are you sure? I looked again at the photographs on the wall, at Ellen's smile frozen in time. Am I sure? My son had just told me to go away. He had erased me from the most important day of his life. Yes, Richard, I'm sure. Cancel them all. Another pause, longer this time. Then Richard's voice cautious. There will likely be penalties. Some fees. I don't care. Do it. When I ended the call, my hands were trembling, not with fear, but with something else. A strange lightness. For years I had bent myself to fit Mark's vision of success, of appearances. Tonight, for the first time, I had chosen myself. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the velvet box. The watch inside would remain unopened. The check on the passenger seat would remain unsigned. And the wedding, that glittering spectacle designed to impress people I would never know, would begin to unravel before the night was over. Somewhere in the distance, I imagined the music still playing at the hotel, the guests laughing, the clinking of glasses. They didn't know yet, not yet, but the foundation had already been pulled from under them. I closed my eyes, picturing Mark's face when he discovered the truth. Not to gloat, not to savor his humiliation, but to finally make him see that everything he had stood on, all the wealth, the appearances, the pride, had come from the father he had just pushed away. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the lesson he could never ignore. I did not turn on the kitchen light at first. I did not need it. The house knew me, and I knew the house. My hand found the back of the chair by the window, the same way it had found 1,000 gear shifts and stubborn bolts. The evening lived in soft shapes. The mantel was a dark bar with paler rectangles where the frames sat. I could see Ellen in the middle frame and a smaller Mark in the one beside it. It was enough. I sat down and let the quiet press against my ribs until the tightness gave way to breath. The clock on the wall kept its patient count. I had never noticed how the sound carried through the whole room until the music at the hotel cut off inside my head. The second hand would not hurry for anyone. It never had. It was the same clock that ticked in the nights when I used to carry Mark to bed after he fell asleep on the couch. The same clock that watched me stand at the sink the night the doctor called. And I understood the shape of the years ahead would be different than the ones we had planned. I reached for the frame with Ellen's face. The glass was cool. We had taken that photo at the county fair on a day that smelled like fried dough and cut grass. Mark was small enough to ride on my shoulders then. Ellen was laughing at something off to the side. I remember that laugh more than anything. She had a way of tilting her head like she was listening for the better part of the joke, and then letting the laugh out all at once like a bell. People used to look over just to hear it again. She did not make it to see our son wear a suit. I set the frame back carefully. I was young when I learned that love and money do not keep the same hours. I started as the kid who swept floors at a neighborhood shop where the owner let me take a busted carburetor home and asked if I could make it breathe again. I could. I learned by touch and by sound. The feel in the wrist when a nut seats clean. The pitch of an engine when it is not getting enough air. The language of machines made sense even when people did not. When Ellen and I got married, I was certain that a life built with the hands could stand as long as any. I signed a lease on a two-bay garage with a roof that leaked above the office desk, and I told Ellen it would be temporary. Temporary stayed with us for a long time. The day Mark was born, I had grease under my nails because the tow truck came late, and I drove an old Buick in neutral the last 2 blocks with the flashers clicking. I washed my hands so hard the skin stung, and the nurse still looked at me like I might break something in that room by just being in it. Then they put him in my arms, and the whole world got quiet the way it had tonight in the lobby. Not silence like emptiness. Silence like reverence. He had a scrunched-up face and long fingers, and I thought he had arrived ready to grab the world and pull. There is a shift that happens when you are given a life to keep. The shop became more than a way to pay rent. It became a promise. I went in early and stayed late. I learned how to keep books without letting numbers steal my sleep. I shook hands with men who talked too fast and smiled too wide, and I learned to move my pen slower. I took pride in honest calls. If a part could be saved, I said so, and if it could not, I did not pretend it could. Word spread. Work came. I added a 3rd bay. Ellen painted the office door blue because she said blue made people think of sky and the feeling of being out on a road with no noise except the wind and the engine. She brought Mark by some afternoons with a paper bag lunch, and he would sit in the old vinyl chair and watch me torque ahead and ask me things like, "Why do pistons sound angry?" and "When will I be big enough to hold the light without my arm shaking?" He always wanted to hold the light. He wanted to be where I was. If life had stayed that simple, I might not be sitting here tonight. But life does what it does. You make a plan, and it keeps its own counsel. Ellen's cough started as nothing, a tickle. A thing we blamed on paint fumes or spring. The day the lab results came back, I looked at the printout and thought, this cannot be my life, because if it is, then the ground I am standing on must not be there. I learned hospital hallways, like I had learned wrench sizes by feel. I learned what hope sounds like when it is trying not to wake the person in the bed. I learned that love can sit in a chair through the night and still feel like it is not enough. I will not tell you that I did not ask the ceiling questions. I did. I asked them without words because if I had let the words out, I might have had to hear them back. We did the things people do. We fought in the ways medicine knows. We laughed in grocery store parking lots for no reason at all because the air was soft and we were still in it. There are moments you pack away because you know you will need them later. Her hand on my sleeve when the nurse made a joke. The way her hair fell on the pillow. The way she said my name. She said it once like a warning the night she realized the road was turning and she was not going to be on it with me much longer. She said Edward, and then she said our son's name, and then she asked me to promise I would give him a life that made him proud to speak where he came from. I said I would. I said it in the way a man says a vow when he has no idea how he will keep it, but knows he will. When Mark was old enough to understand the shape of absence, he stopped asking when his mother was coming home, and he started asking if he could come to the shop. He swept floors better than I ever had. He learned the weight of a socket in the hand, and he learned that cleaning is part of the work, not a thing you do after the work. He told me once while he sat on the milk crate by the bench that when he was a man he would be rich, and he would take me to Italy because he had seen pictures of the roads there and the coast, and he wanted me to see what blue could look like when it went all the way to the edge of everything. He said, "Dad, I promise, when I make it I will take you to Italy." He said it like a kid says a prayer. He said it like a contract signed with a grin and a handful of crumbs from the cookie he had begged out of the woman at the counter in the parts store. Years stacked up the way they do. I kept the shop moving. I learned how to hire people who cared and how to let go of people who did not. I made mistakes that cost me, and I made some that taught me cheap. Mark grew into a teenager who could change a tire faster than most men, and then into a young man who did not like the way his hands looked when they were dirty. He got the grades. He got the letters. A college 2 states away sent a packet thick enough to hold the shape of a life he had not yet named. I hugged him in the driveway and told him what my father never told me, which was that leaving is sometimes the bravest way to stay true to where you started. He looked past my shoulder at the garage and said he would come back on breaks and help in the busy weeks. He said this with one foot already inside another world. I did not hold him to it. You cannot hold a person to what they promised when they did not yet know what the promise would cost. College gave him shine, suits instead of coveralls, words for rooms that never needed them. He brought friends home once and I saw their eyes take inventory of my life like a shop inspector might do. I tried a joke that fell wrong, and Mark changed the subject the way a man does when he senses a ticking under the hood and does not want anyone to hear it. That was the first night I felt smaller in my own kitchen. It did not happen all at once. It was drift. One thing slides in another, and you do not see the gap until you step into it, and the floor is not where you thought it would be. I was not ashamed of what I was, but I learned that pride can be quiet. It does not always come in through the front door. It sits in the back room and watches and waits for you to claim it. I did not always claim it around my son. I began to dress a little better when he was due home. I scrubbed my hands harder. I tried not to smell like the shop. He said once that he could not bring a girl by because the garage vibe was not right for her. He said it like a practical thing. He said she was used to a different kind of life. I nodded like it made sense because it did. People are used to what they are used to. It still put a heat in my chest I did not want there. The offer to buy the garage came in a white envelope with a logo that looked like a bird. A regional chain had been buying up small shops and putting their signs on the roofs that used to leak. They wanted my corner. I said no the first time. I said no because the shop was not a business to me, even though it was a business. It was what I had poured myself into to keep from drowning. It was a promise kept in oil and paper and calloused skin. The second offer came with a number that felt like a door opening. $2.5 million and the option to consult for a year. The figure sat on the table while I ate dinner with the news on and did not touch my food. I turned the number over in my head like a part that might fit if I found the right angle. I asked myself who I would be without a roll-up door and a bench vise. I asked what Ellen would say. I stood under the light in the shop at midnight when the metal has its own smell and the cement sends up cool like a lake, and I listened. In the morning I called them. We signed in a bank office that smelled like lemon cleaner. I shook a hand that did not have scars, and I walked out with numbers and accounts that made no sound but changed the weight in my shoulders anyway. I told Mark on the phone. He sounded proud for a moment, and then he said, "What are you going to do with all that?" And I said I would not make any stupid moves. And he said he had a friend with a startup, and I said no, before the sentence found its end. We did not talk much after that call. I paid off the last sliver of the house. I replaced the roof that had threatened all winter. I bought a used boat because Ellen had wanted to fish the long, quiet afternoons, and I thought maybe I finally would. It turns out I did not want the water without her. The boat sat on the trailer like a kept promise I should not have made. I sold it to a man who promised to take his kids out on Sundays. That felt right. I put most of the money where it could grow without showing off. I learned about terms I had never needed before. I did not lose sleep over it. I did not expand into anything that needed a party. I ate my breakfast at the same table. I watched the clock make its rounds. When Mark told me about Pauline, I was happy in the simple way a father is happy when his son finds a hand to hold. He sounded careful on the phone. He talked about her parents and what they did and where they lived. He did not ask for anything. He did not ask me to meet them. I waited. Months went by. When he finally invited me to dinner, I wore the good shirt. He watched the waitress watch me. Pauline was polite in the way people are when their effort is for the person beside you. She thanked me for raising a man who knew how to hold a chair. I smiled and kept my hands under the table so the light would not catch the scars. Mark spoke to the waiter like a man who had been taught how to use his voice in public. It was a skill. I could admire it. I paid for that dinner without arguing, and he let me. The wedding plans gathered speed like a car on a long grade. I got an email from a planner who had the kind of signature that makes you think they hire people just to design signatures. "We got your name through a friend," she wrote. There was an assumption in her phrasing that I did not examine too closely. I met her in an office that had walls the color of clean snow. She asked about budgets and taste and whether I wanted my contribution discreet. The word discreet sat in the air. I said yes. Discreet. I said it because I knew my son. He would accept a favor if it came without a face. She nodded like she had seen this dance before. I signed lines. Deposits moved from one set of numbers to another. The list of vendors grew and the list of guests grew longer, and I read the names like I was studying a roster for a game I had never learned how to play. The total ticked past the number I had once thought would buy the whole shop and land. I did not flinch. I did not consider it reckless. It was for a day that was supposed to carry other days forward. It felt like the right thing to do. Somewhere in me there was the boy on the milk crate promising me a road with blue on both sides. Somewhere in me there was the man who had said yes to a number on a paper because he wanted to stand up straighter for once. Both of those men signed those wires. He called me twice during those months, once to ask if I was well, once to tell me the tuxedo color because Pauline had strict ideas. He did not ask about the cost of anything. He did not ask if I would bring a date. He did not ask me to give a speech. I did not mind. I told myself that when the day came, I would sit at a table near the back and I would be happy to watch him move through his own life like a man who knew where he was going. I packed his gift slowly. I chose the watch because time is a teacher and sometimes a mercy, and I wanted to put something on his wrist that could carry both. On the back, I had them etch 3 initials and a date and one word that had meant a lot in the shop. Endure. It is not a loud word. It does not draw a crowd. It keeps a man upright when other words cannot. The picture on the mantel of Mark with the baseball glove stuck to my mind and would not let go. He had been so certain in that photo that the world was a thing he could throw and catch. I remember the way he ran toward me across the outfield that day, shouting as if distance itself were something that could hear, and maybe it can. He was small then, and his joy was bigger than his body, and I thought then that it would be like that forever, that no suit or hallway or banquet would ever make him set down the part of him that knew how to laugh with his whole chest. I was wrong about that. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe a father has to see both the boy and the man at once and love both without confusing them. Maybe I kept loving the boy, even while the man was learning how to forget where his hands had come from. I stood and poured water into the kettle. The click of the switch sounded too loud in the quiet. The house breathed around me. The night held steady. Outside, a car went by and its tires hissed on the pavement like a whisper that did not have to make sense. I set a mug on the counter and thought about Italy, because sometimes the mind walks back to the promises that mattered even when the feet do not know how to get there anymore. He had said he would take me. Maybe he even believed it when he said it. Boys do. Men learn that time is not always a straight line from saying to doing. I do not hold that against him. I hold against him the thing he did tonight. There is a difference between breaking a boyhood promise and asking your father to leave your life as if he were a problem to be solved. The kettle trilled. I poured. Steam rose and disappeared. I carried the mug back to the table and set it beside the velvet box. It struck me then that the same hands that had put a gasket back together 100 times and kept strangers on the road were the hands that had placed flowers on table after table in that ballroom without anyone knowing. I had set the stage for my own erasure. I had built the house they tried to lock me out of. That is a kind of joke only time understands. I smiled at it without any humor in me. There is a way you can tell your life again to yourself and make it sound like a story someone else might want to hear. I did not try to do that. I let it sit as it was. A man in a quiet kitchen with a clock that keeps doing its job. A mantle with faces on it. A son who is both the boy with the glove and the man with the tie. A wife whose laugh could still land in my chest like a warm weight if I gave it space. A bank account with numbers I never thought would be mine. A set of choices that made sense when I made them and still made sense now, even as they rearranged themselves into consequences I had not planned. On the counter, my phone lit up once and then dimmed. I did not reach for it. I did not need to see who was calling to know. He would ring. He would ring again. He would send words that asked me to fix something he had broken. He would say, "Dad, we need to talk." He would say, "Dad, this is an emergency." He would say, "Dad, you cannot do this." There is a strange comfort in knowing the lines before they are spoken. It gives you time to decide the words you will use in return. I stood and walked to the front room where the small safe sat behind the row of old manuals on a shelf. Inside was the envelope from the planner with the phrase we use for a sponsor printed near the bottom. They had asked me about preferences the first day. Music, color, cake. I had said yes where it did not matter and no where it did. I had insistences that were not about flowers. I insisted that no one know my name in relation to the bills. I insisted that if anyone asked, they be told that the bride's side had covered the event. Not because I was ashamed, because I wanted my son free of the pressure to acknowledge me. He had taught me that lesson over years. I had learned it well. The twist in that choice arrived tonight. Anonymity bent back on itself and turned into a lever in my hand. I closed the safe and slid the manuals back. I stood there long enough to hear the clock strike the next mark on the circle. The house felt different now that I had made my calls, the way a machine feels when the last bolt is torqued and you know you have done it right. There is no sound for that, only a settling. I went back to the table and looked at Ellen again, and then at the picture of me and Mark at his high school graduation. He had kept his arm loose around my shoulder so his jacket would not wrinkle. He had smiled wide for the camera. After the photo, he had leaned in and said words I had not thought about in years. He said, "Dad, when I make partner, I will fly you to Italy, and we will eat pasta in a place where the chairs wobble because that means it is good." He said it with his eyes on the horizon. I nodded like a father does when he hears his son paint a sky. Tonight, he told me to go away. Tonight, he drew a circle and stepped into it and tried to close it on me. I let him close it. I stepped back the way you step back from a car on a lift and watch gravity do the thing it does. I did not move to catch it. I did not shout a warning. I did the quieter thing. I moved the pin. I let the weight come down on the empty space where his certainty thought a support beam was. In a few minutes, he would feel the drop. He would turn and look for me, and I would not be standing where he had placed me all these years. I would be in my kitchen with the clock and the photos and the mug and the velvet box. I would be the same and not the same. I wrapped my hands around the mug and let the heat soak into my fingers. I thought of Italy in the same way a man thinks of a road sign he keeps passing and never takes. I thought of the promise of blue. I thought of the word he had carved into me without asking. Unwelcome. It has edges. It stings. It also clarifies. It tells you who you are, not to someone, and in doing that, it lets you see who you might be without them. That is not a lesson a father begs to learn. It is a lesson a father can carry once he has no choice. The phone lit again. I watched it without picking it up. The name on the screen looked small in the rectangle of glass. I let it go dark. The clock kept time. Somewhere across town, a band struck up a song and servers lifted trays, and a planner checked a list she thought was still true. Somewhere, my son laughed too loud and then checked himself and then patted his pockets for a phone that would not save him. Somewhere, a bouquet waited to be lifted for a photo that would not be taken. I set the empty mug down and stood. I picked up the velvet box and held it a moment and then placed it back on the table. I pressed my palm flat against the wood as if that could anchor me to the life I had made. Then I turned off the kitchen light. The house settled into the kind of darkness that is not empty at all. It is full. It has weight. It is the same darkness that sat with me in hospital rooms and in the office on nights when I thought the roof would give, and in the front seat of the car when I pulled up to the hotel and saw the way the lights made everything look like it was meant to last forever. I walked down the hall and paused beside the door to the small room where Mark used to sleep. The bed was neat. The shelf still held the little plastic car model he glued crooked and insisted was better that way because it made the air go around it faster. I let my hand rest on the door frame. I let the memory in and did not fight the ache it brought with it. Then I moved on. Back in the living room, I stood in front of Ellen's photo one more time. I told her without speaking that I had kept my promise in a way she might not have imagined. I told her that our boy had lost his balance and that sometimes a fall is a teacher no hand can be. I told her that I would not be the kind of father who shows up to rescue a man from a lesson he chose. I told her that I would still be here when the dust settled if the man wanted to learn a different way to stand. The clock listened. The house held the words without asking me to say them out loud. Outside, a breeze moved the leaves. The night gathered itself closer. I felt steady. I felt the calm that comes after a decision has been made and before the world realizes it. I walked back to the kitchen and sat again and waited for the phone to ring once more. Not because I meant to answer, but because some part of me wanted to hear the sound that marks the start of the collapse. I could almost hear it already faint and far. The first crack. The small sound a thing makes when it remembers what it is built on. The house was darker than usual, though the lamps worked and the electricity was paid. It was not the kind of dark that comes from night, but from a silence that thickens after you have been told you no longer belong. I sat at the kitchen table long after the kettle had cooled, staring at the velvet box. It seemed smaller now, like a reminder of the place I had been pushed into. The gift was ready, the check was written, the watch engraved. None of it mattered. My hand drifted to the drawer on the far side of the table. I had left it closed for weeks, telling myself there would be no reason to open it until the wedding was done and the photos were framed. But that night, with Mark's voice still echoing in my ears, telling me to go away, I pulled the drawer open. The wood groaned, the rails stiff from years of dust and neglect. Inside lay a stack of folders neat enough to look forgotten. The top one bore the crest of Pearl Weddings, the agency, with walls painted like fresh snow. I placed the folder on the table and flipped it open. There it was, my name, Edward Miller, printed clean and bold on every single contract. I had signed them all: banquet flowers, photographer, musicians, even the deposit for the honeymoon. $80,000 spread across signatures that no one outside those walls would ever know about. The planner had smiled when I said the word discreet, nodding, in a way that told me she had met fathers like me before. Fathers who were easier to erase when the bill was paid in silence. The irony pressed against my ribs until I let out a low laugh, the kind that surprises you because it carries no humor. They had turned me away from a hall I had built with my own pen. Each chandelier, each polished floorboard, each sparkling glass of champagne, they stood on my labor, my savings, my sacrifice. And still, I was the one uninvited. I traced my finger along the total at the bottom of the last invoice. $86,400 with fees included. The number glared back at me. I had thought it would bring pride. Instead, it burned. The phone sat heavy in my pocket. I pulled it out, stared at the screen until the reflection of my tired face blinked back at me. My thumb scrolled through the contacts until it stopped at Richard. He had been my advisor for years, patient with my questions, respectful of my caution. He had taught me what risk looked like and what security felt like. He had never once treated me as less for not knowing the language of investments when I first came to him. I pressed call. The line clicked and his voice came through warm and steady. "Edward, good evening. Is everything all right?" I breathed in, letting the air settle in my chest before speaking. "Richard, I need to ask about some payments, large ones, scheduled for tonight and tomorrow, wedding-related. Can they be stopped?" There was a pause, the faint sound of typing on his end. His tone grew careful. "Technically, yes, if they have not fully cleared. It depends on timing." "Edward, do you want to stop them?" The question hung between us like the ticking clock on my wall. I closed my eyes and saw Mark again, his tie straight, his words sharp. "Dad, you weren't invited. Please leave." "Yes. Stop them all." Another pause. "Edward, you should know there may be penalties, fees, and of course consequences with the vendors. I don't care about the fees. Do it." He hesitated. "May I ask why?" "Because the person whose wedding I paid for made it clear I had no place there." My voice surprised me. It did not shake. It was steady, almost calm. I could hear the keys tapping again. "Very well. I will move quickly. Some may already be authorized, but I will do what I can." "Thank you, Richard. One more thing. If those funds are returned, I want them redirected. Redirected where? Into a trust. For my granddaughter Emily. Education, future, whatever she needs. She is the only one who still looks at me without shame in her eyes." Richard's tone softened. "Of course, Edward. We can set that up. I will need your signature, but the process can begin tonight." We ended the call. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was a tremor of release, a decision finally made. For years I had bent myself around Mark's pride, careful not to embarrass him, careful not to step where I was not wanted. But tonight I had chosen differently. The folder lay open before me, the contracts lined with my name. I stared at them as if seeing them for the first time. I had been proud to sign them once, proud to give my son something grand. Now I saw them for what they were, a record of my own erasure. I pushed the folder aside and stood pacing the kitchen. The floor creaked in familiar protest beneath my weight. I stopped by the window, looked out at the quiet street. The maples swayed gently in the night breeze, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. My reflection looked back at me in the glass, older lined but not broken. Somewhere across town the ballroom glittered. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, music rose. They believed they were standing on something solid. In truth, the ground had already begun to shift beneath them. The twist of it all struck me harder than any insult. They thought Pauline's family had paid. They thought Mark was the successful man who could cover such extravagance. They believed I was absent because I had nothing to offer. But it was my money, my name on those papers. Without me, the floor under their celebration was hollow. The realization brought no glee, only a cold clarity. For once, I held the quiet power. Not the kind you boast about. The kind you keep close, the kind that works in silence until the moment it can no longer be ignored. I turned back to the table, gathered the contracts, and slid them into their folder. I placed the folder back in the drawer, closed it with a firm push. That chapter was finished. The phone buzzed again. A message this time. Mark's name lit up the screen. It read, "Dad, we need to talk. Call me back." I let it go dark. The clock ticked on. The air in the house felt lighter, as if some burden had shifted off my shoulders. The decision was made. The plan was in motion. I sat down once more, folded my hands, and let the silence stretch. This was only the beginning. The phone felt heavier than it ever had, as if the metal and glass had swallowed my resolve and wanted to see if I would take it back. I did not. I scrolled to Pearl Weddings and pressed call. The line rang like a metronome, patient and indifferent. On the third ring, a bright voice came alive, the kind of voice offices hire to make everything sound solvable. Pearl Weddings. This is Carrie. How may I assist you? I said, this is Edward Miller. I am the primary sponsor on the Thorne wedding scheduled tonight. I want all payments stopped. There was a pause that did not belong in a cheerful lobby. I could hear her click through a system, fingers finding their way to a screen with my name on it. When she spoke again, the lightness had thinned. Edward. Yes. I have your file. She cleared her throat. The event is live. Guests are on site. The ceremony is closed. The reception is scheduled to begin within the hour. I said I understand. Stop all payments. She tried to catch up to the sentence. Stop. The payments are already in motion. She was breathing faster. Some are authorized. Some are queued to settle overnight. She put a hand over the receiver, then forgot to cover it all the way. I heard the muffled hum of a room not built for bad news. She returned. Can you help me understand the reason? The reason is simple. The person whose wedding I funded told me I was not invited and asked me to leave the premises. I do not sponsor what I am not welcome to witness. The words sounded clean in my own ears, like a line of chalk that knows which side of it you stand on. She absorbed them in silence and tried a different road. We can resolve this after the event, she said. It will be hard to reverse midstream. There will be penalties. Service interruptions. I want to avoid embarrassment for all parties. I said we passed the point of embarrassment when I was told to go away at the door. I am calling to do the only thing that returns the balance to what is honest. Stop the payments. Another pause. I could hear her weighing policy against reality, and reality was heavier. She said, Edward, I will need explicit instruction on record. Do I have your authorization to withdraw sponsor consent on all vendor contracts associated with this event? You do. She exhaled. Then the voice professionals learned to use returned to her throat. I will contact the venue manager, the catering lead, florals, the band leader, and the photographer. There will be a cascade. Are you prepared for the consequences of a cascade? That word cascade rolled through the old house like thunder, thinking about getting started. I said, I am not seeking spectacle. I am seeking accuracy. Where funds are mine and consent is mine, consent is revoked. She did not argue after that. People who live in logistics know when the fulcrum has shifted. She said, please remain available. I may need you to confirm identity with certain vendors who require sponsor voice authorization. I said you have it. And Carrie? Yes. When they ask for a reason, you can tell them the sponsor no longer agrees. She repeated it slowly, as if trying on a piece of clothing she had never worn. The sponsor no longer agrees. Understood. We ended the call. The kitchen settled around me again, familiar and solid. The clock kept sawing the air into even pieces. Outside, a car door thudded 2 houses away, and a dog barked twice and then thought better of it. I set the phone on the table screen up and looked at the folder still warm from my hands. My name was printed on every line that mattered, that had felt like pride when I signed. Now it felt like a lever. It was not revenge. I said the words to myself because they mattered. It was alignment. If you build a room and someone tells you to leave it, the light has to go with you. That is all I was taking back. Light I had brought. Not a single table, not a chair, not a ribbon. Only the light. The phone lit again almost instantly. "Carrie," I answered. "The venue manager has confirmed the authorization," she said, moving quickly now. "Their finance flagged a withdrawal notice from your bank. Without cleared funds, they cannot continue service. They are willing to hold 30 minutes pending a replacement payment." She swallowed. Mr. Miller, the manager, used the word suspend. I pictured the ballroom, its chandeliers, the way laughter skims the surface of a big room and then thins and then drops when something invisible changes. I said that is their policy, and a fair one. If a replacement payment is not available within their window, they should follow their rules. Another voice behind her asked a question. She covered the receiver with a palm, and I heard fragments. Yes, the sponsor. No, the mother is not on file. No, the bride's parents are not the financial party of record. She returned. Catering has asked for immediate confirmation. They have prepared service. They require guarantee. If funds do not clear, they will begin breakdown to preserve costs. I let out a breath that did not know which way to go. Part of me wanted to spare the staff hours of waste, wanted to protect the hands that had sliced fruit and folded linen. Part of me knew that the only way my son would ever hear the truth was if the truth spoke in a room he could not ignore. I said, "Do what your contracts require. Protect your people. Follow your terms. My consent is withdrawn." There was a small twist in the next sentence that felt like a hinge clicking into place. She said, "Your anonymity request is being tested. The venue is asking who the sponsor is. They did not know. No one knew. They thought the bride's side covered everything. I will not disclose your identity unless you approve." I pictured Mark's face as the planner's representative pulled him aside. The same face that had looked past me in a restaurant, careful with the way he spoke to the waiter, practiced with the tools that open doors I had never learned to knock on. I did not want spectacle, but I would not hide either. I said, "You may disclose my identity if the venue requires it for compliance, but not as gossip, as fact. If asked who withdrew consent, you may say the groom's father. Full stop." She repeated groom's father like a person filing a new entry in the drawer where the world keeps its categories. "Understood," she said. "I will proceed." I caught a sound in the background, then a raised voice, the kind of voice that thinks volume is a lever. It pulled memory through me of engines revving too hard when they needed a gentler hand. Carrie said one more thing. "The band leader is asking about the timing. If there is no service, they will not set up. Do you wish to address it yourself, or shall I?" "Handle it," I said. "And, Carrie, yes, be kind to them. None of this is on the staff." Her voice softened a half step. "I will." We hung up. I stayed seated. My hands were steady now. There is a steadiness a man learns in a garage that sometimes you forget you have until a bolt refuses to budge. You can hurt yourself trying to muscle it. Or you can lean in slow, find the angle, and let the thread remember what it was cut to do. Tonight was a thread remembering. The phone buzzed with a different name. "Richard." I picked up. "Edward, the bank confirms. Most payments were scheduled to settle after midnight. We have intercepted them. A few deposits authorized this afternoon are being reversed on force of sponsor revocation. Expect some vendors to push back. Let them push where the policy allows," I said. "Keep the trust paperwork moving for Emily." "Already initiated," he said. "I will need your signature tomorrow. Funds will be reserved and blocked from interference." He paused. "You should know your son called the branch main line. He demanded details on the freeze. We did not disclose anything. He will likely call you." "Thank you, Richard." We ended. The light over the table pressed a small circle onto the wood and left the corners of the room in the kind of gray that keeps your thoughts near. I picked up the velvet box and turned it once the ribbon leaving a faint crease in my palm. I set it down exactly where it had been, as if its position might matter to someone later and to me now. The phone rang again. "Pearl Weddings," I answered. Carrie's voice had lost all ornament. "We are in the middle of the cascade," she said. "The venue has announced a hold. Guests have been asked to step into the lobby. The photographer is packing equipment pending outcome. The bride's mother demanded to know who is responsible. The groom's father declined to answer her. The groom is calling someone." "He is calling me," I said. and looked at the phone screen where even then his name flashed through a separate line. Carrie hesitated. Do you want me to convey a message? Yes. Tell them the sponsor did not approve the event under terms where the sponsor is refused entry. Tell them the sponsor withdraws consent and funding. Tell them service can resume if funds are produced by the parties who decline to include the sponsor. She repeated it word for word like a clerk entering a deposition. Then she said something I had not expected, something true and human. Mr. Miller, I am sorry you are in this position. I nodded, though she could not see. Thank you. Be good to your staff. Do your job. Then go home and sleep. This is not your burden. She said I will call with any further required verifications. We ended. I put the phone down and stood up. The house felt like a shell the tide had left clean of what did not belong in it. I walked to the sink and rinsed the cup I had used earlier and set it to dry with the rim facing the window. The small, ordinary act steadied me more than any speech could have. A man needs to keep his hands moving when his heart is pulling hard in two directions. At the edge of hearing, a memory knocked. Not of Ellen this time, but of Mark. At 11 the summer, he asked me how to use a torque wrench, and I showed him how to set the dial and listen. There was a thrill in him then for the feeling of seat and click. He had wanted to learn not because he needed to, but because he was near me and the work made sense in his hands. I held that boy beside the man at the hotel with the sharp tie and the sharper words. Both were my son. Only one of them could hear me tonight, and not through speeches, through consequence. The phone lit with a new call. Not Carrie, not Richard. The hotel's number. For a breath, I considered letting it pass to voicemail. Then I thought of the managers I had known who had to stand in lobbies and make announcements they did not choose. I answered. Mr. Miller, the voice said, formal and tight. This is the Belvedere manager. We have received notification of sponsor withdrawal and bank reversal. As per policy, we have suspended service while awaiting replacement funds. The groom insisted you were not the sponsor. The planner indicated otherwise. To process correctly, we require a final verbal confirmation from you that you are the contracting party of record and that you withdraw consent. I said I am. I do. He thanked me in a tone that contained no gratitude and a great deal of understanding. We will proceed with suspension until payment is remitted by another party. He paused. I regret the necessity. So do I said. It would have been a fine night if people had chosen better. He cleared his throat. That is often true. We ended. I imagined the scene not with pleasure but with clarity. The band cases half open, the kitchen doors swinging and then still. A group of servers huddled near a hallway with trays that would not be used. A mother's voice rising, a father's face turning a color that looks expensive when it is healthy and wrong when it is angry. A bride blinking hard to keep makeup in place. A groom looking for a story that saves him from a truth. And a planner with a clipboard standing exactly where all the stories meet the contract. The storm was not noise to me. It was a system. Decisions have weather. If you live long enough, you learn to see the line on the water where the wind is headed. Tonight, that line moved across a ballroom floor. The phone vibrated across the table like a small animal trying to escape. Mark. I let it dance and fall still, then vibrate again. It kept doing that in sets until it learned I would not pick it up. Somewhere a younger man was trying every tool except the one that would work. The one that starts with I am sorry and continues with I was wrong. That tool lives deep in a drawer few people open until life strips the threads off all the others. The house sighed. The maples shifted. The night held. I thought of Emily, then my granddaughter, the one set of eyes in that family that still looked at me without calculation. She would be confused, then angry, then loyal, then sad, then back to loyal again. I trusted her heart more than I trusted anyone else's in that building. The phone had not rung with her name yet, but I could feel it moving toward me like a light in a fog. Part 5 would belong to her voice. Part 4. This part belonged to the mechanics of a collapse. Carrie called again. We are through the window, she said. The venue has begun breakdown. The caterer is packing. The florist is removing arrangements to preserve inventory. The band has left. The photographer will not deliver any files beyond pre-ceremony candids already captured. The bride is off-site. The groom is demanding an explanation. The phrase she used was dry as a legal pad. We provided it. I asked, has the staff been harassed? There have been raised voices, she said. The manager has handled it. Security is present. No one was harmed. Good, I said. Go home when your work is done. There was a small silence. Mr. Miller, she said, we see many kinds of nights in this job. Most of them blur. I do not think I will forget this one. Neither will they, I said. We ended. I sat back down and let the room wash over me in slow waves. Hook-pacing twist. Words the internet had made everyone think they knew. The truth was simpler and older. A man draws a line. Another man crosses it. The first man either moves the line or moves himself. Tonight I did not move the line. That was all. I stood and walked to the front room. The air there smelled like old books and lemon polish. I stopped at the mantel and looked at Ellen's photo and told her the sequence in my head so I would not have to say it out loud. The call to the planner. The manager's brief sentence. The phrase, suspend. The pause before a room changes shape. The practical acts of packing and unplugging. The clink of vases going back into crates. The hum of a compressor turned off. All the small sounds of an evening choosing to end. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I felt the ache and I let it be exactly the size it was. A man can hold grief and boundary at the same time. They weigh different, but they fit in the same pair of hands if you have spent a life lifting what needed lifting. When I came back to the kitchen, the phone was still and black for the first time that hour. I picked it up and set it face down as if it were sleeping. The street outside had settled into the late-hour quiet that belongs to people who know when to stop talking. I poured water into the kettle again, not because I needed another cup, but because the act of waiting for the small whistle puts your breath somewhere it can find the pace that keeps you human. The whistle came and I took it off early. I poured and watched steam twist and disappear. I carried the mug to the table and did not drink it yet. I placed my palm on the cool wood and felt the grain. The storm was here. Not the kind with rain, the kind with aftermath. Tomorrow would bring words. It always does. Apologies that are not apologies. Accusations that sound like math. Lawyers if someone wanted to pretend the world was a chessboard instead of a kitchen table. But tonight belonged to silence and the knowledge that when something built on disrespect collapses, it is not vandalism. It is gravity doing its job. The phone vibrated once more, a softer pulse, a name that settled something inside me before I even answered. Emily. I did not pick up on the first ring. I let the second one cross the room. Then I lifted it and said her name in a voice I hoped would tell her everything she needed to know before either of us spoke another word. Grandpa, she said, and her voice carried the tremor of a bridge. Where are you? Home, I said. And you? In the hotel hallway. They asked everyone to leave the ballroom. Dad is looking for you. I did not tell him I was calling. Her breath shivered once and then steadied. What is happening? Pacing slowed without instruction the way a road does when the grade changes. I said we will talk. I am here. She exhaled. Okay. Behind her a murmur swelled and thinned, the sound of 100 people trying to pretend they know how to stand while the floor plans get redrawn. I listened not to the words but to the weight. The storm was overhead. In a minute it would move on and the damage would be counted and the lessons would line up patiently to see who would let them in. For now I kept my voice even, my chest quiet, my hands loose on the edge of the table. Tell me what you see, I said, and heard the next part of the night begin. The phone in my hand vibrated again, softer this time, a rhythm that carried a name I did not fear. Emily, my granddaughter, the one person in that ballroom who had never looked at me as though I were less. For a moment I let the screen glow against the dark table, thinking of the little girl she once was, running barefoot in my yard, chasing bubbles with the determination of someone who believed they might last forever if she only caught them gently enough. Then I answered. Her voice came through, trembling, the sound of someone holding back tears, but not succeeding. Grandpa, where are you? Why did you leave? They told me you walked out. Her words hit harder than the manager's announcement or her father's commands. They were not accusations. They were the fragile plea of someone who loved me enough to think leaving was impossible. I said I did not leave Emily. Your father made it clear I was not wanted. He asked me to go. She gasped. That cannot be. He would never. But he did, I said, steady as a wrench tightening to its seat. You saw me there, ready-dressed, gift in hand, and you saw what happened when he looked me in the eye and told me I had no place. The silence on the line stretched broken by her quiet sob. Grandpa, this isn't fair. You raised him. You gave him everything. Why would he do this? I closed my eyes, pressing the heel of my hand against my brow. Because sometimes people forget where they come from when they are too busy trying to prove where they think they are going. Your father thinks my calloused hands and my simple ways would embarrass him in front of her family. He decided appearances mattered more than blood. She whispered so soft I almost missed it. He is wrong. I breathed in, steadying myself. I am still here, Emily, just not in the way he imagined. What do you mean? She asked. I looked at the drawer where the contracts lay, my name printed bold on every line. I thought of the phone call with Richard, of the funds pulled back into my account, waiting for purpose. A purpose I had already found. I said the money that was meant to pay for this wedding will not vanish. It will go where it belongs. To you. She stammered, confused. To me? Grandpa? I don't understand. I said the wedding was a show, an illusion built on my labor and my silence. Your father made it clear I was not welcome in that illusion, so I chose to end it. The money that was supposed to buy chandeliers and champagne is now being placed in a trust for you, for your education, your future, your independence. Her breath caught. No, that is too much. I can't take that from you. You are not taking it, I told her gently. I am giving it. It is the best investment I could make. Better than wine that would be spilled on carpets, better than flowers that would wilt before morning. You have a future. I want to see you build it without chains. The sound of her crying filled my ear, raw and unguarded. Grandpa, no one has ever believed in me the way you do. I smiled, though she could not see it. I always have, from the day you were born. You looked at me with those eyes, my eyes, and I knew you were different. Strong but soft in the right ways. Capable of kindness in a world that often forgets it. She laughed through her tears, shaky but real. You make me sound better than I am. You are exactly who I see, Emily, I said. And now you will have the means to chase what you want. Graduate school, travel, whatever path you choose. You will not need to depend on a man who measures your worth in appearances. Her voice grew firmer. Grandpa, thank you. But what if Dad finds out? He will, I said. He already suspects. He tried calling the bank when he realized the payments had been stopped. He will rage. He will blame me. He may even try to fight it. But the trust will be airtight. He cannot touch it. She went quiet, then spoke with the careful weight of someone older than her years. He will never forgive you. I leaned back in my chair, staring at Ellen's photo on the mantel. Perhaps not. But forgiveness without respect is hollow. I have lived long enough bending under his conditions. Now I stand. The silence between us was not empty. It was full. Full of what had passed between generations, the weight of loss, the cost of loyalty, the stubbornness of survival. Finally she whispered, You are my ally, Grandpa. Always. I felt something unclench in me. And you are mine, Emily. Always. She told me about the ballroom then, how the guests had been herded into the lobby confused, how Pauline's parents whispered furiously, their faces pale with humiliation, how Mark stood near the doors, phone in hand, calling again and again, each time angrier, how the staff packed flowers into crates and wheeled food back into the kitchen. She said it was chaos. I listened, my jaw tight. And yet through the chaos, a truth was blooming. Not one I shouted, not one I carved with a knife, but one that revealed itself like cracks in glass. They thought they could erase me. Instead, the erasure became the center of their evening. Emily's voice broke through my thoughts. Grandpa, are you sure this is what you want? To be the reason everything fell apart? I closed my eyes and let her question settle. It was the question of a kind heart, one that fears hurting even when hurt first. I answered with the calm of a man who has lived long enough to know the difference between cruelty and consequence. I did not ruin the wedding, Emily. Your father did when he decided his mother's memory and his father's presence were not worthy of the room. I only took away the illusion he built with my money. That is not destruction. That is clarity. She drew a long breath. I understand. There was another pause, then her voice softened again. Grandpa, you once told me that when Mom and Dad divorced, you thought I would disappear from your life. But I never did. I never will. I felt my throat tighten. You never did, Emily, and that has made all the difference. She laughed lightly, shaky still. I can't believe you are giving me this chance. A trust fund. It feels unreal. It is real, I said, and it is yours. I want you to promise me one thing. Anything, she said quickly. Promise me you will use it to build something that belongs to you, not to please your father, not to prove anything to anyone else, just for you. I promise, Grandpa. Her words landed like a seal on the moment, quiet but unbreakable. We spoke longer, softer then. About her studies in architecture, about the project she had been afraid to pursue because of the cost, about her dreams of designing spaces that breathed, spaces that welcomed rather than excluded. She said maybe one day she would design a house for me in Italy, the trip her father had once promised but never fulfilled. I told her I would hold her to it. The night grew deeper as we talked. The house around me grew warmer, less empty. For the first time in years, I felt like I had not lost everything. I had gained an ally. When we said goodbye, her voice was steadier. She said, I love you, Grandpa. And I said it back. After the call ended, I sat in silence again. But it was not the same silence as before. This silence carried hope. The phone lay on the table face down. My hands rested beside it. I looked again at Ellen's photo. I whispered without sound as though she could hear anyway. We still have family worth fighting for. I stood, stretched the stiffness from my back, and walked to the window. Outside, the maples swayed. Somewhere across town, the storm of the wedding still raged. But here in this house, a different seed had been planted. Not chaos, not resentment. A seed of loyalty, of love that would not bend under shame. Emily was my ally now, and with her I felt stronger than I had in years. The trust would be set. The funds would be hers. And no matter how loud her father shouted, that truth could not be undone. I turned from the window, switched off the kitchen light, and let the house settle into night. The storm outside could howl all it wanted. Inside, the foundation had never felt more solid. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tomorrow would bring fury. But tonight I carried a calm that came only from knowing that even when a son rejects you, a granddaughter can remind you why you still endure. The morning after the collapse of the wedding, the sun rose without apology. It streamed through the blinds in thin golden blades, cutting across the kitchen table where the contracts from Pearl Weddings still sat in their folder like ghosts. I had not slept much. My body had rested, but my mind had walked the long hallways of memory and consequence. When I finally rose, I knew exactly what needed to be done. By noon, I was sitting in a downtown office that smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. The sign outside read, Holt and Carrington Attorneys at Law. I had known Martin Holt for years, not as a friend, but as the kind of professional who remembers you without needing to ask twice for your name. He had helped me once when I sold the garage, reading the fine print the buyers hoped I would skip. He was calm, deliberate, not the kind of man who confused noise with strength. That was why I trusted him now. The receptionist guided me into a conference room. The air was cool, the blinds drawn against the noon glare, leaving the light to pool from a single brass desk lamp that cast everything in warm gold. On the table were papers stacked with clinical precision, a pen resting diagonally on top. The room was silent except for the hum of the building's old ventilation system. Martin entered his suit neat but not flashy, his hair more gray than I remembered. He nodded as though we had just seen each other yesterday. Edward, I heard from Richard that you need a trust drawn up. I inclined my head. Yes, for my granddaughter. The money that was meant for the wedding. He did not ask why the wedding money was no longer going to a wedding. His eyes flicked to the stack of papers, then back to me. He gestured to the chair at the head of the table. Sit. Let's make it official. I lowered myself into the chair. The leather creaked. The pen gleamed under the lamp like a small weapon waiting to be picked up. Martin sat opposite me and spread the first document open. The pages were heavy bond, the kind that carries weight in your hands, the kind no one mistakes for a casual promise. He tapped a line with his finger. This is the Declaration of Trust. It states that you, Edward Miller, establish an irrevocable trust in the name of your granddaughter, Emily Miller. The initial funding amount is $86,400. The funds are protected, invested conservatively, accessible only for education and life development expenses until she reaches the age of 25. I listened, my heart steady. I said, make it clear that neither her father nor her stepmother has any claim. Martin nodded. It is already clear. Only you as settler and she as beneficiary, no one else. Even you cannot withdraw once you sign. That last part gave me pause. Even I cannot withdraw. He looked at me carefully. That is the strength of it, Edward. Once it is signed, not even your son can contest it. It belongs to Emily, completely. The words settled in me like stone in water, heavy but sure. I thought of Mark pacing in a hotel lobby, shouting into his phone, demanding control. I thought of Emily, voice trembling but loyal, whispering, I promise. The contrast could not be clearer. Martin slid the pen toward me. Shall we? The lamplight caught the barrel of the pen, and for a moment I remembered other tools in my hand. A socket wrench snugging into place, a torque dial clicking, a grease pencil marking timing on a belt. Tools that built engines, kept cars breathing, paid for every roof and every meal. This pen was no different. A tool. Tonight it would build something invisible but stronger than steel. I picked it up. My name sat waiting at the bottom of the page. I pressed the tip to the line. The ink flowed smooth, permanent. Edward Miller. The sound was small, just the scratch of metal on paper, but in my ears it roared like an engine turning over for the first time. I signed again on the next page. And again. Each stroke felt like laying a brick, building a wall no storm could breach. When the last page was complete, Martin gathered them, neatly tapping them into alignment. He looked at me with the faintest of smiles. Congratulations, Edward. It is done. Done. The word echoed. I set the pen down and leaned back, exhaling. I felt lighter, though the room seemed to grow heavier with the significance of what had just happened. Martin said Emily is now the sole legal beneficiary. The funds are beyond contest. Should your son attempt to interfere, he will find no door to push open. The law is clear. I closed my eyes for a moment. In my mind, I saw Emily's face when I would tell her. Not disbelief this time, but recognition. That her grandfather had not only promised, but delivered. The twist was simple, almost quiet, but it carried the force of justice. The money that had been meant to fund a night of pretense now belonged entirely to her future. It was no longer mine. It was no longer available for my son to beg for, demand, or manipulate. It was hers, untouchable. When I opened my eyes, Martin was watching me. You look relieved, he said. I nodded. For the first time in years, I feel like I made a decision not just to keep the peace, but to keep my dignity. He stacked the papers, slid them into a leather folder, and handed it to me. A copy for your records. The originals will be filed. I accepted it, the leather warm in my hands. Thank you, Martin. He stood, straightened his suit. No need to thank me. You did what had to be done. We shook hands. His grip was firm, steady. I left the office with the folder under my arm, stepping out into the brightness of the day. The sun hit me full in the face, and I squinted but did not turn away. Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of 58 years on my shoulders, but also something new. Resolve. When I slid into the driver's seat, I placed the folder carefully on the passenger side. I rested my hand on it for a moment. Inside were just papers, ink signatures, yet they felt like a shield. The drive home took me past the familiar streets of Wilmington. Shops I used to fix cars for, neighbors who waved without knowing the history playing out behind my eyes. I saw fathers holding hands with daughters on the sidewalk, and for the first time I thought less about what I had lost with Mark, and more about what I still had with Emily. Back at the house, I placed the folder on the kitchen table beside the velvet box. 2 symbols, one of what had been denied, one of what had been secured. I poured myself a glass of water, sat, and let the silence fill me. I imagined Mark storming into my house, demanding explanations, demanding control. I imagined him shouting that the money was his by right. I imagined myself answering with a calm that came not from stubbornness but from truth. It is not yours. It is not mine anymore either. It belongs to Emily, and there is nothing you can do. That was the small twist, the quiet weapon. I had armed myself not with anger but with law, with ink and paper, with a trust that could not be undone. The lamp on the table shone on the folder, its light golden and steady. I let it burn until the edges of the room blurred, until the weight of the night before lifted. For years I had fought battles with my hands under hoods and on shop floors against rusted bolts and stubborn engines. Tonight I had fought with silence, with patience, with a pen, and for the first time in a long time I felt I had won. Emily did not need to say much for me to feel the shift. I could hear it in the air behind her. The polite music that had been floating over the lobby all evening stumbled and went thin, as if it were a ribbon pulled too tight. Voices rose, then dropped, then gathered into a hush that did not sound like celebration. Somewhere near her a cartwheel squeaked. China touched China and then did not touch again. She drew the phone away from her mouth, and I heard the hotel chime, the tone they use when they want everyone to listen without asking why. Her breath was quick. "Grandpa, hold on. They are making an announcement." In my kitchen, the clock kept its even count. The lamp threw a small circle on the table. Out there in the other world, a manager cleared his throat. Emily moved closer, and I caught the words as if they had traveled under a door. "Due to a funding issue, service is being suspended for the reception. We appreciate your understanding as we work to resolve the matter." The room around Emily exhaled and then inhaled too fast. The way people stand on a deck when the boat shifts underfoot. Someone tried to laugh and failed. Somewhere a violinist plucked a test note and then set the bow down. Emily whispered into the phone that the waiters had stopped pouring and were lifting glasses that were half full off the tables with careful hands. She said the floral crew had returned with crates and a woman in black was cutting twine with a small pair of scissors and not looking at the guests. I could picture it the way I picture an engine by sound. 100 small tasks reversing themselves at once. Work being undone with the same care it had been done an hour earlier. It is a kind of grace when work is undone that way. It says nothing was wasted, even if the night was. Emily moved again. "The planner is here. She is speaking to Dad. He is shaking his head. Pauline is beside him. Her mother is standing very straight. Everyone is watching from the edge like they are pretending not to." I said, "Keep a little distance if you can. You do not need to stand inside their storm." She said, "I am all right." Then she lowered her voice, and I could hear the clipboard in Carrie's hand before I heard her words. An even tone, the one professionals learn when they have to deliver a truth that does not care about feelings. She told them the payments had been withdrawn by the sponsor. She used my title, the sponsor, 3 times, as if the repetition could make the floor under the sentence feel clear. It did not sound like cruelty. It sounded like gravity. Emily murmured that Pauline's mother had stepped forward. The woman asked who in a voice that made the question look like an accusation. Carrie stayed in that even place. She said the sponsor of record is the groom's father. She said it twice because the first time no one seemed able to hear. The second time the sentence found a place to sit. The lobby noise did a strange thing then. It did not rise. It fell. It fell the way water does when it finds the path it was meant to take all along. A low sound followed a sweep of whispers, a fabric sound, silk and disbelief rubbing together. Some guests turned their faces toward Mark. Some turned away the way people do when they want to give a man privacy and also want to keep their own distance from what might happen next. Emily took a breath that I felt as much as heard. "Grandpa." She said your name is moving through the room without anyone saying it out loud. People are thinking it like a string pulled tight between them. I did not answer right away. I let the image settle. Not pride, not shame, just the fact of it. For months I had kept my name out of view so that my son could stand where he wanted without my shadow touching the wall. Tonight the shadow had been there all along, and now the light had simply shifted to reveal it. Emily spoke again. "Dad is pointing at the manager. He is saying he never asked for sponsorship. He is saying the bride's family paid." The manager is shaking his head and pointing at a screen. He is being very calm. Now Carrie is holding the clipboard toward Dad, and she is asking him to read. He will not take it. Pauline is touching his sleeve, and her hand looks like it is trying to move a wall. I saw that picture clearly in my head. The practiced voice, the firm jaw, the way Mark sets his shoulders when he thinks volume will get the job done. I heard the other thing, too. The small scrape of a server's tray as it turned back down the hallway. The little chorus of wheels on carpet. The thud of cases closing. The photographer's quick snaps had stopped. Even the air conditioning sounded different. Emily drew the phone away again. Another chime, another voice. The planner spoke to the room now, not just to a corner. Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that the reception will not proceed. There has been a withdrawal of funding by the event sponsor. We are working with both families to resolve outstanding matters. Thank you for your understanding. She did not say my name. She did not need to. The title was enough, and it went where it needed to go. Emily whispered that Pauline had started to cry. Her mother had moved her away from the center so people would not watch her face rearrange. Her father had stood tall for a second, and then too tall, and then he had deflated a little the way a man does when he knows he cannot pay a bill he promised was already paid. Mark seemed to shrink and then grow and then shrink again, swelling with anger, and then collapsing into something like pleading, and then hardening again. He kept lifting his phone as if it were a lifeline. My own phone began to vibrate on the table then. His name lit the screen. The sound it made cut through the room even though it was small. I watched it blink. Emily whispered, "He is calling you." I did not move. The ring stacked and ended and began again. I did not move. She said, "Grandpa, he wants you to fix it." I said, "I know what he wants." A man learns in a shop that there are moments when touching a running machine makes it worse. You learn to cut the power, step back, and let the thing come to rest. My silence was not cruelty. It was the only tool that would stop the engine that had been throttled too hard. The next ring did not come. A small gap opened in the noise. Emily said, "He is leaving a message." She held her phone near her chest and did not speak. I did not need to hear the words to know their shape. Accusation first, then command, then the long reach for pity, then the threat dressed in a suit of reason, then the promise to talk later if only the fire could be put out now. I had heard that song before. It had different verses and always the same chorus. Emily drew closer again. "Grandpa, the guests are moving. Some are heading for the doors. Some are hugging like they need to prove they were here for love, not for spectacle. Some are filming." She sounded both sad and practical. "You cannot keep phones out of a room like this anymore. People do not know what else to do with their hands when the plan ends." I let myself lean into the back of my chair. The wood gave a small sound and remembered who I was. The hum of my old refrigerator rose and fell. I said to Emily that she did not have to stay. She said, "I will not leave you alone with this." Then she corrected herself. "I mean, I will not leave you alone in this." I smiled into the receiver at the difference between the two. A small thing that meant everything. Alone with a problem is a room with no windows. Alone in a problem is a room with a door. She said Carrie is coming back to the microphone. The manager is at her shoulder. She is asking guests to collect their belongings and exit the ballroom. She is explaining refunds for rooms. She is doing her job. She is not looking at Dad when she speaks. She is looking at the space above everyone's heads like she learned that trick in a class called How to Stand in a Storm. I pictured her clipboard raised like a small shield. I felt a steady respect for a stranger doing honest work. In a different life, we might have been neighbors who lent each other tools over a fence without keeping a tally. Mark's name lit my phone again. I let it make its little sound and then go quiet. He had not yet found the drawer where the only tool that works in a moment like this waits. He would find it tomorrow or not at all. I could not help him search for it. Some drawers open only from the inside. Emily said Dad is watching the screen the manager is showing. He looks like he wants to argue with the numbers. Pauline's father just walked away from him. Her mother is with the bride at the elevator. "Grandpa, it is over. It is really over." I did not nod, but my body understood. I said, "Find a quiet corner for a minute and breathe. Then go to your room if you have one. If not, come home. Do not stand in the path of anyone's anger. It is not meant for you, but it will not know the difference." She whispered that she would go upstairs. Then she said one more thing before I hang up. When the planner said the sponsor withdrew, there was a moment when I thought everyone would turn on you in their heads. But I watched faces. Most of them looked at the groom, not at some abstract father who was not allowed in the room. People know more than they admit. They know who drew the circle first. Her words put a small light in my chest. Not a bonfire, a lamp. the kind you can carry with you without burning your hands. We ended the call with promise words that did not need to be explained. I set the phone face down and let the quiet spread again. It was a different quiet now than the one that had greeted me when I first came home. That one had been thin and sharp and tasted like metal. This one was thicker, warmer. It tasted like dust and wood and a house that had chosen to keep standing. The phone buzzed with a new call. Not Emily. Pearl Weddings, I answered. Carrie's voice was lower. The formal tone remained, but the edges had softened. She said the venue had fully suspended service and initiated breakdown. The caterer had wrapped remaining food to return to the kitchen. The florist had removed arrangements. The photographer would deliver only the early images. There had been some raised voices. Security had assisted. No staff had been harmed. She paused before the last piece. The groom asked us to state publicly who the sponsor was. We declined to turn the ceiling into a stage. We kept the statement as policy language. But in private conversation with the manager, we confirmed the sponsor of record. The manager handled it. I am sorry for the necessity. I told her she had done her job and done it well. I told her to pack her own things and go home. I told her that none of this belonged to her. She thanked me in a voice that made me think she might have needed to hear that sentence more than once in her life. When we ended the call, I stood and walked to the sink and ran water, not because a dish needed washing, but because sometimes a man needs to listen to an honest sound at the end of a dishonest day. The faucet made its small song. My hands moved through it. I dried them on the towel and hung it neatly on the hook, as if order were a prayer and the kitchen were a place that answers. A new message blinked on the screen. I did not press play. I saw enough in the first line of transcription to know the shape of it. Dad, answer the phone. You cannot do this. You are ruining everything. Then more words that would try to turn the law into a feeling. The law does not care what you feel when you call it to do its job. It cares what you signed, and when, and why. I thought of the leather folder on the passenger seat yesterday, the lamp on Martin Holt's table, the pen in my hand, the letter of the trust drawing a boundary no shout could cross. I had taken my first pressure and shaped it into a shield. Tonight that shield was doing the thing I asked it to do. There is a quiet satisfaction that comes when a tool performs to its design. I sat back down with the clock behind me. Time did not speed up to meet me or slow down to console me. It kept its pace. I began to keep mine. My mind went where it wanted. To Ellen. To the day we signed the lease for the 2-bay garage that smelled like dust and hope. To Mark at 10 running across a field with a glove too big for his hand and laughing because the ball had finally found the pocket like a secret. To Mark at 32 standing in a lobby he did not build telling me to go away from a room I had paid for. To Emily at 22 holding a phone up so that I could hear the sound of a plan ending. I let the images sit beside each other without trying to force them into a neat line. Life refuses neat lines on the nights you most want them. It gives you a scatter of stars and asks you to find a pattern you can live with. The kitchen window showed me a street that had learned the rhythm of my neighborhood. A jogger passed beneath the streetlight and did not look up. A cat made its quick movements along the hedge, careful as always to avoid the sprinkler heads. My house breathed. That is what old wood does. It breathes. I listened and breathed with it. Another call rolled across the table. It was not Mark this time. Pauline. I let it go. I have nothing to say to a woman who looked at me like a smear on a window she wanted clean. Perhaps one day she will find out that windows do not clean themselves by pretending the smudges are not there. Perhaps she will not. It is not my job to teach that lesson. I sent Emily a short message so she would know where to find me tomorrow. I told her to sleep if she could and to lock her door and to keep her heart soft where it belonged and strong where it needed to be. She replied with the little thumbs up and a heart, the small language of the young that still manages to say enough. It landed better than many speeches I have heard in rooms with carpet that costs more than my first car. The phone stayed still for a while after that. I picked up the velvet box and opened it for the first time since the afternoon. The watch lay on the cushion quiet and bright. I ran a finger along the back where I had asked the jeweler to etch a single word. Endure. I had chosen that word before tonight. It fit better now than when I had thought of it as a gift. Endure is not a command. It is a way of standing. It is the way a tree does it. It does not push at the wind. It lets the wind pass and still keeps its roots in the ground. I closed the box and set it down. It no longer felt like a gift for a son who could not hold it. It felt like a note to myself written in steel. Time passed. A siren sang somewhere far off and then faded. A door closed somewhere close by and then the neighborhood settled again. I thought about the words, first pressure. They fit the night. This was not revenge. It was a weight applied at the right point on a lever to move a stuck thing. The stuck thing tonight was not the wedding. It was the story my son had been telling himself for years about who deserved to be seen and who did not. Eventually, my phone lit with a final message from him that did not carry the act of anger. It carried the sag of a man who has put all his tools on the bench and found none of them fit. He said in halting phrases that the hotel had closed the ballroom and people were heading out and could we talk later, please? He said we could fix it tomorrow if I would just stop whatever it was I had done. The message ended before the sentence had a place to sit. That is how many of his sentences end when he is not practicing for an audience. Off balance, reaching. I did not reply. Tomorrow could bring its own grammar. Tonight I wanted none. I stood, turned off the lamp, and let the dark draw its quiet curtain. On the mantel, Ellen smiled in the small light the street threw against the glass. I stood there a while, and then I spoke to her without moving my lips. I told her the first pressure had been applied, and that the structure had answered honestly. I told her the people in their fine shoes had found out the floor is only as good as the men and women who built it. I told her our granddaughter had stood where a person belongs, close enough to love, and far enough to survive. I went to bed then. Not because sleep promised anything, but because a man has to lie down sometimes to show his bones he still trusts them. The sheets were cool. The house creaked like an old friend settling into the chair beside you. I lay on my back and listened to my own breath. Outside, the storm moved on. In its wake, it left a ballroom learning how to be an empty room again. A planner who would drive home in silence and let the adrenaline drain. A bride who would look at her face in a mirror and wonder what she had done wrong. A father of the bride who would make a list of numbers and realize there were more columns than he had pens. A groom who would stare at his phone and see my name and feel every inch of the distance he had created with a single sentence at a door. That is what a first pressure does. It does not finish the work. It begins it. It shows you where the cracks already were. It teaches you which walls were honest and which were just paint. It does not give you rest. It gives you a plan. I closed my eyes. The clock kept the night. Somewhere in the small hours I slept and did not dream. The morning came with a noise I did not recognize at first. Not the kettle, not the clock, not the old refrigerator humming its familiar song. It was a small storm on my phone, a scatter of taps and trills that sounded more like rain against a window than messages. I reached for it without rushing, and the screen woke in a wash of icons and banners. A link. Another. Then 3 more stacked on top of each other, all from people whose names I knew and people I did not. The same words repeated in different hands. Have you seen this? I did not press any of them for a moment. I let the sound die and the house breathe and my own chest find the slow pace I had taught it over the years. Then I tapped one. The video filled the screen. It had been shot on a phone held too high by someone who wanted to look like they were not filming. The angle bent the room in a way my eyes did not trust. I recognized the chandeliers by their light. That was all I needed. The ballroom I had never been allowed into had become a stage on a screen that fit into my hand. The sound on the clip was a blur of voices that did not agree with each other. A manager's calm rhythm rose and fell like a buoy. A planner's even phrases cut through twice, and then the clip holder dipped and the floor filled the frame. When the picture lifted again, the servers were moving in lines that looked like retreat. Trays down, glasses gathered, flowers being lifted in soft bundles the way you carry a sleeping child you should never have had to wake. My name traveled through the room without anyone saying it with their mouths. You could hear it in the way people looked at Mark and then at each other. The caption at the bottom of the video did not bother with nuance. Groom's father pulls funding. Wedding ends in chaos. I watched it once. Then I set the phone down and let the kitchen come back into view. The lamp, the sink, the chairs that had held me through better years and worse. The video sat there like a visitor who did not know how to leave. A second clip arrived before I could stand. This one started closer to the front. The hotel chime had just finished speaking for the building, and the planner stood with a clipboard as if it were a passport. She said the phrase, "sponsor," with the kind of care you hear in a nurse at 3 in the morning. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The microphone did the lifting. The camera swung right, and there was Mark, face pale and jaw set tight, his tie still perfect, because hands do not shake while they straighten silk, not even when the ground goes soft under your shoes. Pauline was not beside him. There was a halo of her absence around him, and the camera did not know how to frame that. Another banner. Another link. I did not press this one. I knew enough. The room had broken. The video was an aftershock failing to explain the quake. The phone ran out of breath and then gathered more. A call. Emily. I answered before the second ring had time to find its voice. Her words came in a rush and then slowed as if she were learning how to climb her own breath. "Grandpa, the videos are everywhere." She paused long enough to listen to her own heart. "Dad is yelling at everyone. He started with the manager, then with the planner, then a server who did not deserve it, then Pauline's father. Pauline left. She went upstairs with her mother and a woman who must be some kind of coordinator. They moved like they had done this before. They have not, but their faces wore a kind of practice I do not understand. I listened. I let her map the noise for me. Then I asked what she needed first. She said, "I need to hear your voice to remember the shape of right and wrong." I gave her the only thing I had left to give her that hour. Steady. You are not responsible for any of it. Your job is to stand where love stands and step back where harm steps forward. Stay close to doors. Keep your phone charged. Tell me where you are and what you can see without getting near the heat. She said, "I am on the mezzanine above the lobby. I can look down and they do not look up." A security guard told people to stop filming, and 2 more people decided they were journalists. She drew in a breath. "There is someone here you should know about. I did not expect him to be on your side. Do you remember Aaron from Dad's baseball team? He was the shortstop who used to throw sidearm and get away with it. I remembered the boy easily, hands quick, eyes quicker. He had eaten half his dinners at my table for a summer because his own house was a mess and we could not pretend it was not. He had learned to tie a tie in my kitchen before a school dance and had not looked embarrassed to ask a man who smelled like oil for help. He was a grown man now, somewhere below my granddaughter on a hotel carpet that cost more per square yard than the first engine block I ever bought. I said I remember him. Emily said he stood beside Dad for a while, the way men do when they want to be seen supporting someone who is losing, and then all at once he was not standing there. He turned to a little knot of people and said a sentence I could read on his lips even though the room was too loud to hear it. He said the father did right. He said a son who cannot honor the hand that raised him needs to learn that money is not love, and love is not silence. He did not shout. He said it like he had been practicing it in his head for a long time. I did not speak for a few beats. The stillness that comes when a person you once fed chooses to stand up in a crowd and tell the truth makes a different kind of sound. It is not applause. It is not thunder. It is a door opening in a wall you thought was solid. I let that sound come through me and go. Emily exhaled. There are more like him here than I thought there would be. People who nodded when he spoke. People who did not look away from Dad out of pity, but out of a need to give him the space a man needs when he realizes the story he has been selling has no buyers left in the room. I felt a wash of sadness then, not because I wanted anyone to save my son from the moment he had earned, but because the moment itself is a hard teacher, and I would not wish it on any man who had ever run across a field toward me holding a glove that was too big for his hand. I chose my next words with the care you use when a gasket is about to seat. Say nothing to fan it. Say nothing to smooth it. Let it be what it is. The only work now is to let the lesson find him. She said, "I understand." Then the quick breath of decision. I am going upstairs. I will not be here when he looks for someone to unload on. We hung up. The phone sat warm in my palm a long moment after her face disappeared. I placed it on the table beside the velvet box and the folder from the lawyers and stepped to the sink. The faucet sang, water on steel, a sound I trust. I watched the stream catch the light and break into small silver pieces before it found the drain. When I returned to the table, there was another link waiting, this one without commentary. I opened it without meaning to, and the lobby swam back onto my screen. Someone had caught the exact moment Pauline's parents put their hands on her shoulders and turned her toward the elevators. Pauline did not fight the motion. Her eyes were already somewhere deeper than the walls around her. Mark stepped after them and then stopped, his foot swinging in a fraction of a circle like a compass that has lost its magnet. You could almost read the words forming in his mouth. You could almost hear them not landing anywhere. The clip ended and jumped immediately to a thread of comments in the place where the internet lets strangers try on certainty like a shirt. Most of it was noise. 2 lines were not. The first was from a woman I did not know and did not need to know. She wrote that pride is the only thing that gets heavier when you think you are lifting it. The second was from a name that made me sit back and adjust what I thought I knew about loyalty. It was Aaron again, this time in writing. He said the father did right. He said there are some debts you cannot pay with a check. He said in every small town there is a man who built something with his hands while everyone else drove past without seeing. He ended with a sentence that looked like he had scraped it from somewhere behind his ribs. If a son chooses shame over gratitude, sometimes the only way to teach him weight is to put it in his hands. He had written my name without writing it, and for that I was grateful. I did not like the thought of my life being weighed on a scale that anyone could use, but I recognized the way the language held. There was more honesty in those lines than in all the tuxedos pressed shoulder to shoulder the night before. A call from Richard interrupted the scroll before I could get lost in it. His voice was brisk and exact in the way a man sounds when his morning has moved faster than his coffee. He said the reversals had finished clearing. He said the trust had been recorded in all the places that matter. He said a man identifying himself as my son had called the branch again and raised his tone and his words and had been told exactly nothing. He said the machine had done what it was built to do. He asked if I was well. I said I was steady. I thanked him for the timeliness of steel and paper and signatures. He said steel and paper cannot keep a man upright if he has nothing inside him to lean on. Then he dropped back into the current of his day, and we ended. The phone did the rain sound again. Messages from neighbors who had seen the video because someone always sees the video. One from a woman who used to bring her car to my shop and who had once cried in my office because her engine had died on a payday afternoon, and she had thought that meant the day had died too. She said in plain words that she had not forgotten the way I let her pay over months without shame. She said she did not believe everything the internet said, and she did not have to because she knew the kind of man who had kept her on the road. The note sat in my chest like a small warm stone. Then a message I did not expect. Aaron. Not his public comment. A direct note. The words were careful and short. He said he was sorry for the noise. He said he had always known where the lines were drawn in this town and who drew them. He asked if I needed anything. The simplest sentence he wrote was the one that mattered. I stood where I should have stood a long time ago. I told him thank you without embroidery. I told him a man never stands late if he finally stands. The kettle clicked on by habit even though I had not touched it. I must have grazed the switch when I set the phone down. The water began to wake. I let it. Steam curled and softened the morning, and for a minute it felt like a fog rolling along a river I had not yet crossed. The videos kept finding me, but I moved slower now. I knew they did not have anything left to teach me. The internet is a mirror that only shows you what you walked toward. I was not going to let it decide what I saw. Emily called again from her room upstairs. Her voice had less tremor in it. She had closed her door and drawn the curtains and created a small square of quiet inside a building that had forgotten how to make any. She said Dad had shouted at everyone until his throat broke, and then he found silence, and it scared him more than any argument had. She said he had knocked on Pauline's door and her mother had opened it and given him the kind of look that can only be earned over years of seeing men try to talk their way out of what they walked their way into. She said 2 of his work friends had left without saying goodbye. She said one friend had stayed, the one who was more accountant than companion, and had begun to ask him about numbers in a voice meant only for him. I heard the arc in her report. Hot, then cold, then practical. The storm had passed the point where sound matters. It was at the stage where lists begin. She said, "You will not believe this. He told the accountant that you never paid anything. He said you were trying to take credit for something you did not do." I did believe it, not because it was true, because denial is the last tool left in the drawer when a man refuses to open the one that matters. I asked her to pretend she had not heard it. The truth would do its work without her needing to defend me. Your only job is to be a granddaughter, I said. Let the men in this story be exactly who they are for a day. Tomorrow there will be other work. She was quiet for a beat. Then she said, I walked to the ice machine to make a noise that did not belong to them. In the hall, a woman I did not know stopped me to ask if I was the granddaughter. I said yes, and she took my hand and said that a father who knows how to stand still in a storm without raising his voice is a rare thing. Emily laughed softly into the phone when she told me that. Then she said she felt better. We ended the call with the simple words we had always used when we needed a rope across a river. I love you. I said it back, and the rope held. The kettle clicked off, and I poured and stood with the mug in my hands without drinking. The heat settled into my palms and ran up into my arms the way a good tool warms you in winter just by being near. I thought of the word trending because someone had typed it beneath one of the videos as if that explained anything. I set the mug down and thought of other words that mattered more. Choice, boundary, dignity. None of those words trend. They just last. Near midday, a car pulled up outside and idled. I looked through the curtain without moving it aside. A man stood at the curb with his hands on his hips, staring at the house like it owed him something. He did not move toward the door. He did not need to. I knew why he was there. There are always messengers on days like this. People who want to carry a sentence from one room to another because it gives them the feeling of being part of the current. He left after a minute, and I watched the taillights disappear. The neighborhood returned to itself. The messages thinned as afternoon stretched. Quiet arrived, then left, then returned again with a different tone as if it had learned something since morning. I answered 2 notes that deserved an answer. I ignored the ones that wanted a performance. I let my phone sleep face down for a while and stood in the backyard to listen to the wind move the maple leaves from one certainty to another. When I came back inside, there was a voicemail from a number I recognized without liking. Pauline's father. I did not press play right away. I made myself a sandwich. I watched the slow condiment spiral like a small galaxy, and only when the plate was on the table did I let the message speak. He said he wanted to discuss the situation like men. He said he respected that I had resources and backbone. He said some things with a heaviness that tried to sound like respect and did not quite remember how. He asked me to call him back to see whether an arrangement could be reached that would save the family from further embarrassment. He used the word arrangement twice as if it had the power to make 2 wrong notes sound like a chord. I did not call him back. The only arrangement I had time for had already been inked in a quiet room under a brass lamp with a pen that did not shake. The only family I was saving was the part of mine that could still look me in the eye and say promise and mean it. Late afternoon cast the kind of light through the blinds that makes a house look both younger and older at the same time. Dust drifted with no hurry, and the clock kept time with the stubbornness of whatever keeps a heart alive when it has every reason to stop. I let the 2 sounds line up in my head and sat with them until they matched. Then Aaron called. Not a message. A call. His voice carried the pitch of a man who had been watching a river flood the wrong side of town and had finally put his boots on. He said, I am outside if you want to talk. I stepped to the window, and there he was leaning against a car that looked like it had never asked a man to pretend it was more than it was. I opened the door, and we stood on the porch like men do when there is too much to say and the air might help. He said, I need to tell you something so that when the stories begin to twist again, you will have one that does not. He told me he had watched my son dress his sentences for years to fit the rooms he wanted to be in. He told me he had kept quiet longer than he should have. He told me the look on Mark's face when the planner said sponsor to the room broke something in him that had needed breaking. He said the sentence he had spoken downstairs had not been for the lobby. It had been for himself. I told him thank you with no extra shine on the word. He nodded and looked at the street and said there are some debts we hold for a decade and some of us pay them by finally saying a thing where the person who needs to hear it can hear it. He pulled out his keys, turned them over in his hand once and said, call me if you need a shoulder tomorrow. Then he left as quietly as he had arrived. Evening gathered its small lamps across the neighborhood one by one. My phone had stopped pushing other people's angles toward me. The house was mine again. The videos still existed in all the places videos live now, but they could not enter the room without my permission. I gave them none. Emily sent one last message as the sky went from blue to that kind of gray that tries to remember what color it was a few minutes ago. She wrote that she was safe in her room and that she would leave early in the morning, and that if her father came to my house, she wanted to be there, but she would not insert herself if I thought it unwise. I told her to come when the sun was up if she wanted. I told her to keep her phone loud at night. I told her I was proud of the way she had stood her ground without being made of stone. She sent back the little heart, and then the phone went quiet like it had been waiting all day to sleep. I sat with Ellen again at the mantel. The room around us had learned new shapes over the past 2 days, not because furniture had moved, because the weight had shifted. I told her without words that the videos had not broken me, that they had not built me either, that what we had done together in hard years had not been erased by a lobby full of murmur or a caption written by someone waiting for a ride. I told her about the boy who had eaten at our table and stood for us when it mattered. I told her about our granddaughter's voice finding its steadiness. I told her the storm had sent its first signal of being nearly finished. The air felt like the hour before a decision. I washed the single plate. I turned out the kitchen light and stood in the doorway to let my eyes adjust to the softer dark. Everything was still in its place. The velvet box, the leather folder, the chair that knew the shape of my back. I thought of tomorrow and felt no dread. The videos had done what they could do. The town had said what it wanted to say. The old friend had stepped where he needed to. The bride's family had retreated into a kind of silence that always follows embarrassment. The groom had worn out the word call. Tomorrow would bring a different kind of weather, not the internet's version of storm, the kind that arrives when a man knocks on a door he is sure will fly open because it always has. And it does open. And he finds a father standing there with the kind of calm that only ink and patience and clean decisions can make. The kind of calm that does not move when voices do. I went to bed with that knowledge tucked inside my ribs like a tool I might need before noon. The clock walked around its face, and I let sleep find me without a fight. In the hour before the windows softened from black to the first idea of morning, I woke once and listened. The house and I breathed together. The storm had moved offshore. The water was still rough. That was all right. I have been a man of rough water my whole life. Tomorrow I would stand on the porch and look at the horizon and make the choice the day demanded. The pounding on my front door began before the clock struck 7. It rattled the frame like an angry storm, each blow sharper than the one before it. I had already been awake. I had been awake most of the night, listening to the silent shift, listening to the house breathe in and out like an old companion that knew the weight of secrets. The sun had only just begun to slip between the blinds, painting long stripes across the floor when the voice arrived. "Dad, open this door. Dad, you destroyed my life." The words cracked in the morning air like glass breaking on tile. My son's voice, Mark's raw and shredded, nothing like the controlled tone he had practiced for business meetings or the polite charm he used at dinners. This was stripped. This was a man whose mask had been torn away and who didn't know how to hide anymore. I stood slowly the way you stand when you want your bones to remember patience. I walked to the door and rested my hand on the knob, but I did not turn it yet. His fists pounded again, echoing through the wood. I imagined the neighbors stirring, peeking from behind curtains. Let them see, I thought. Let them hear. The world had always seen me as a man who stood in silence. Today, that silence had turned into something else. When I finally opened the door, Mark nearly stumbled inside. His suit from the night before was wrinkled, his tie pulled loose, his shirt stained at the collar. His eyes were bloodshot red, not only from sleeplessness, but from humiliation. He jabbed a finger at me. "You ruined everything. Do you even understand what you did?" I closed the door gently behind him, the wood settling back into place. "Good morning, Mark. The coffee is nearly ready." "Do not play calm with me," he spat. "You think this is some kind of game. You embarrassed me in front of everyone, Pauline's parents, her friends, my colleagues. Do you know what it means to have a wedding collapse in front of 100 people? You made me look like a fool." I moved past him, steady as a mechanic in his bay, and filled the kettle. The sound of water against metal was honest, unflinching. I placed it on the stove and struck the flame. The blue hiss filled the kitchen. Mark followed, pacing like a caged animal. His voice rose. "I need you to fix this. Call the bank. Call the hotel. Tell them it was a mistake. The payments can be reinstated. The honeymoon tickets, the catering, all of it. You can make this right. I turned, leaning against the counter. Why would I reinstate anything, Mark? Because it was my wedding, he barked. Because you sabotaged me out of spite. Admit it. You could not stand that I didn't want you there. So you waited until the last moment to humiliate me. I studied him the way a doctor studies a patient who refuses to name the wound. My voice was calm. No, what I did was not sabotage. It was clarity. His face twisted. Clarity. You call this clarity? Pauline's family may never speak to me again. My job could be on the line. Everyone thinks I am a liar. I reached for the mugs, set them on the counter. The kettle began to hum a low warning. Do you know why they think that, Mark? Because for years you paraded around pretending you were the man who could afford all of this. The truth is you could not. He froze, his shoulders stiffening. What are you saying? I faced him squarely now. Every chandelier in that ballroom, every flower arrangement, every glass of champagne poured for your friends, paid for by me, quietly, without fanfare, without even my name spoken. His mouth opened and closed. That's not possible. Pauline's parents only covered the rehearsal dinner, I interrupted. The rest came from my account. I met with the planners, I signed the contracts, I transferred the deposits. $86,400. Every receipt has my name. The kettle whistled sharp and piercing. I lifted it from the flame and poured the water over the coffee grounds. The steam rose between us like a curtain. Mark's voice cracked. Why? Why would you pay if you didn't even want me to have it? I stirred the coffee slowly. Because I thought I was giving you a chance to build a memory without shame. I thought maybe despite the distance between us, you would want me to help you start this new chapter. But you made it clear at that door. You didn't want me there. You didn't want my face in your photographs, my presence near your colleagues. You wanted the money, not the man. He slammed a fist against the table. Then why pull it away? Why wait until everything was set up, everyone gathered? You ruined me. I set the spoon down, met his eyes. No, Mark. You ruined yourself when you told your own father to go away. You drew the line. I only stepped back and let you see it. He was trembling now, his anger fraying into desperation. Fine. You proved your point. You showed me I was wrong, but give the money back. We can reschedule. We can salvage something. I slid a mug toward him. He didn't touch it. I said the money is not yours anymore. His head jerked up. What do you mean, not mine? I leaned against the counter, hands steady on the edge. It belongs to Emily now. Every cent. I moved it into a trust yesterday. It is irrevocable. For her education. For her life. No one, not you, not me, can touch it. The words landed like steel. His mouth fell open, his face drained of color. Emily. You gave it to Emily. She's just a kid. She's 22, I said. A young woman who has shown me respect when you could not. She will use it to build something that lasts. Mark's voice broke, caught between fury and grief. You are choosing her over me. I shook my head. No, Mark. You chose long ago when you decided my hands embarrassed you. When you decided your mother's memory was inconvenient. When you decided appearances mattered more than blood. Emily simply never made those choices. He staggered back a step, his face contorting. You will regret this. You cannot erase me from your life. I took a sip of coffee, its bitterness grounding me. The only thing I regret is waiting this long to stop letting you erase me. His fists clenched. He paced. He muttered words that trailed off into nothing. I saw him at 10 years old, screaming in the garage when he lost a game, kicking at tools until Ellen's hand rested on his shoulder. Back then I could calm him with a few words. Now nothing reached him. Finally he looked at me with eyes that seemed smaller than they once were. I have nothing left, Dad. Pauline might leave me. Her parents are finished with me. Everyone saw those videos. I am ruined. I set my mug down carefully. Then perhaps this is where you begin to build again, without lies, without shadows. He shook his head violently. No, I need the money. I need you to fix this. I stayed still. The trust belongs to Emily. There is no undoing it. He stared at me as if waiting for me to break to laugh, to admit it was all a cruel joke. But I didn't move. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint tick of the clock. Then, with a sound between a sob and a growl, he swept his hand across the counter. The mug toppled, coffee spilling dark across the wood. He didn't care. His face crumpled. "You are not my father," he whispered hoarsely. "You never were." The words should have pierced. Instead, they fell like stones into a river already running too strong to be stopped. I looked at him with a calm I had earned through 58 years of labor and loss. "Goodbye, Mark." He stumbled toward the door, flung it open, and left. The slam rattled the windows, shook the pictures on the wall. I stood in the kitchen with the spilled coffee, the fading echo of his anger and the certainty that a door had closed forever. I cleaned the spill with slow, careful movements. Each stroke of the cloth felt like an erasure of noise, leaving behind only the surface I had chosen to keep. The twist was complete. The money was gone from his reach, placed in the hands of someone who still understood loyalty. My son's collapse was not of my making. It was of his own. I had only let the truth step out into the light. And as I set the mug back upright, I realized something I had never admitted to myself before. I did not need his forgiveness to keep living. What I needed, I already had. My dignity, my peace, my decision made. He came back after noon, the heat pressed low and the cicadas already at work in the maple. I heard the car door, the hurried feet on the walk, the breath gathered just outside my threshold. There was no pounding this time. One measured knock, and then the pause of a man who has exhausted his first weapons and come hunting for new ones. I stood in the kitchen and let the knock travel through the rooms and find me. Then I went to the door and opened it. Mark filled the frame. The suit had been changed, but the man inside it had not. The red in his eyes had settled into a darker ring, the kind you see on fighters the morning after. His jaw worked once, twice, as if he needed to chew his words into shape. He stepped inside without being asked and shut the door with more care than he had that morning. He looked at the walls like the house had opinions he needed to reckon with. Then he turned. "You will regret this," he said. The words were flat, but he pushed them with every remaining ounce of force he thought he had. "No," I said. "The only thing I regret is raising a man who thinks respect can be bought." The sentence did not strike him like a slap. It landed slower, like an anvil set gently where a table expects a vase. He took it in, blinked, tried to set it somewhere it would not tip over. He failed. His mouth opened, then closed. His shoulders, which had been held in that careful line he uses for boardrooms, caved forward. He went to the table and rested both hands on it, palms down, as if bargaining with wood. I could see the little tremors in his fingers, the kind that follow a night without sleep and a morning without anchors. When he spoke, the velocity in him was gone. It had been replaced by something stranger, a mix of plea and pride that could not decide which one would drive. I said things I should not have said. He began, eyes on the grain. I was angry. I am still angry. But we can put this back together. We can talk to Pauline's parents. We can explain. We can schedule something simple. It does not have to be grand. I will pay for it. I will find a way. He lifted his eyes then, and for a second I saw the boy with the glove, not the man with a spreadsheet. It pulled something in my chest that I had held tight since he first stood under the hotel's lights and told me to leave. I did not move toward it. I stayed where I was. "You do not need a wedding to fix what you broke," I said. "You need truth, and you need time. Neither of those comes in packages you can pick up at a desk." He shook his head faster now. "That is not what I am asking. I am asking you to stop being stubborn. Move the money. Undo the trust. Or set up another. You have more. You always have more." "No," I said again, and the word was not sharp. It was old and round and finished. "I do not have more for this. The trust is done. It belongs to Emily. I am not undoing that. Not today. Not ever." His eyes flared and then dimmed. He looked toward the mantel and did not dare let his gaze rest on Ellen's picture. He looked toward the kitchen and did not see the kettle. He looked at his own hands and seemed surprised they did not know what to hold. When he finally found words again, they were smaller than the suit he wore. "I am not a bad person," he said. I did not argue with the sentence. I did not soothe it either. I let it pass in the same way you let a gust bend the branch, and then let the branch remember its own strength. I watched him swallow. The skin at his throat moved like a man forcing down medicine. Then all at once the compartments inside him failed. The careful anger, the polished defense, the practiced distance, all of them lost their edges. His face folded. The first sound that came out of him was ugly. a half-groan, the kind a man makes when he has been holding himself together with wire and the wire snaps. He brought a hand to his eyes as if he could keep his expression from collapsing simply by covering the part of him that could be seen. "It is not fair," he said, the words coming from behind his palm. "It is not fair. I tried. I tried so hard to be who they needed me to be. I tried to build something big enough that no one would look at where I came from and judge me. And now everything I built looks cheap. They are laughing at me. There was a time when I would have moved across the room at the first sign of tears in my son's eyes, when I would have put a hand on the back of his neck and told him the world could be survived if a person kept breathing. But I am not that man anymore, and he is not that boy." I stayed beside the counter and watched him search the air for something to lean on. "People will always laugh," I said, "when they feel unsafe. They laugh to move the fear out of their own chests. Let them. Your work is not to make them stop. Your work is to stop needing them." He let his hand fall. The wet on his cheeks embarrassed him and angered him in equal measure. He wiped at it too hard and left his skin red. He stared at me as if I were a stranger he had been told to trust. Then his voice returned to the old track and hard clay dried where mud had been. "You are cruel," he said. "No," I answered. "I am finished. There is a difference." He took a breath with that old dramatic lift in it, the one that always meant a threat was on its way, dressed as warning. "If you do not help me," he said, "I will not talk to you again. I will cut you out. I will make sure Emily chooses. I will tell everyone who asks that you set out to ruin me." My body did not move. "I have survived worse sentences than the ones you are practicing," I said. "And I do not need introductions to people who would rather hear your story than look at the papers that carry my name on every line that mattered. You have been telling your version for years. It has not made you safe." He stared. He blinked more than once in that kind of rapid, dry blink people fall into when they cannot cry and want to anyway. Then he looked around the kitchen like he needed a prop. The mug on the table was clean. The knife on the board was clean. The countertop had been wiped, its small circles drying into dull. His gaze found what I had brought in from the garage that morning and set at the far end of the table. A simple metal toolbox, old red paint flaked at the corner's handle, worn smooth by 1,000 lifts. It had been his once. Small bought the summer he thought everything could be taken apart and made better by the night. He walked to it as if it might offer him a different angle on the day. He flipped the two latches. The lid lifted with that thin tin sound that never changes, no matter how old the box is. "Empty," he said, and the word carried everything in it that neither of us wanted to hold. "Yes," I said. "I emptied it this morning. I cleaned it. I told myself that if you came, I would show you what you left me. Not the tools you borrowed and did not return. Not the money you asked for and forgot to pay back. Not the hours. The box itself. The thing that is supposed to carry the things. That is what you left. This is what it feels like to stand across from a man you raised and find nothing inside the container you built for him to use." He stared into the clean metal belly of it. His face changed again, and for a second I saw shame without defense. Then his jaw found itself and he shut the lid hard. The sound snapped the moment in half. He held the handle as if he would take it with him, then set it back down in the same place he had found it. He straightened. He tried one more route. "You do not understand how the world works now. You do not understand what it takes to survive out there." "I do," I said. "It takes the same things it always did. Honest work, quiet courage, the ability to say I was wrong without adding a price tag to the end. You left those tools in the box a long time ago." He laughed, a brittle thing that hurt his throat. "You talk like a sermon." "No," I said again. "I talk like a man who has already lived the consequences of his stubbornness and learned to stop before the mountain falls on him. I have nothing to sell you. I am not going to beg you. I am not going to rescue you. I am not going to harm you. I am going to stand exactly where I am and let the law and the truth keep their shape. That is all." He looked toward the front door and back at me. "You will miss me when I am gone," he said, the old last arrow. "I will miss the boy I loved standing beside me in a garage where the air was honest," I said. "I have been missing him a long time already." He blinked, and for one heartbeat I thought he would say the line that had been circling us since the hotel entrance, the line that begins with I and ends with wrong. He did not say it. He put his hand on the back of the chair to steady himself and then let go as if the chair had burned him. "Tell Emily she is making a mistake choosing you," he said. "I will not put her in that room," I said. "She is not a party to this case. She is the future. You have your own courtroom to walk into, and it will not have her as judge." He stepped away from the table, then away from the toolbox, away from the conversation he had hoped would fold neatly. His eyes were wet again, and this time he did not hide it. He reached for the doorknob and paused as if lines on the other side of the wood might organize themselves into a set he could play. Then he turned the knob and left. Out on the walk, he stopped halfway to the car as if he had forgotten something. He turned around and looked at the house at the window at the door he had just exited. He opened his mouth and then closed it. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. He got in. He drove away. The sound of the engine fading down the block was not the sound of victory. It was the sound of a weight shifting from one place to another. In the quiet that followed, I heard the house breathe again. The clock did its job. I let myself feel the ache that had been waiting in my ribs ever since I first saw him at the hotel under that ceiling I had paid for. It was not a wound. It was a reckoning. I went back to the table. I picked up the toolbox. I opened it as if I might have been wrong and something had appeared in the interval. It was still empty. It still shone in the spots where my hand and a rag had rubbed away what time leaves behind. I set it down and closed it and let my hand rest on the lid. Then I moved it to the shelf by the hall, a place where I could see it without tripping over it. Emily texted as the lid settled. A short line. "Are you all right?" I told her the truth. "I am steady." He came. He left. The line held. She sent back, "Where are you?" and I wrote, "In the kitchen." Then the 3 dots that mean a person is thinking too fast for their thumbs, and then a final sentence that warmed the room a degree. "I am coming." She did not knock. She opened the door with the soft authority of someone who belongs. She crossed the space between the threshold and me as if it were a few inches instead of a whole history. She wrapped her arms around me and held on. Not a quick, polite hug. Not the careful touch people use when they are afraid something will break if they add weight. This was a hold. Her head fit under my chin exactly the way it always had, the curve of her shoulder finding the place my hand had learned to settle when she was 5, and fell asleep in the truck on the way home from the bait shop with a paper cup of worms in her lap. I breathed the smell of her hair and the sweetness of whatever soap she had used at the hotel and the sharper outdoor scent of summer. She did not let go. She did not talk first. The house seemed to lean toward us. When she stepped back, she kept one hand on my arm like a tether. "I saw him in the parking lot as I was leaving," she said. He did not look at me. He looked through me and at his phone like it might give him a different father if he stared at it long enough. I wanted to be angry at him for that. I was for a minute. Then I just felt sorry. Not the sorry you pour on a person to get them to like you. The other kind. The one that admits you cannot climb into their body and breathe for them. "You cannot," I said. "And it is not your job." She nodded. Then her eyes found the red medal on the shelf. She pointed. "Is that his?" "It was," I said. "Now it is mine again. Or perhaps it is nobody's." She walked over to it, pressed the latches, lifted the lid, and smiled a small smile that managed to hold grief and humor the way good smiles do. "Empty," she said. Then she shut it and touched the handle. "It looks lighter than I remember." "It is," I said. "That is what happens when the things you thought you had to carry turn out to be nothing." She looked at me as if I had handed her a tool she would use for a long time and kept it tucked into the pocket of her expression. Then she turned practical. "I have to pack and get home. Classes will not wait for family drama." "But I wanted to see you with my eyes, not just my phone." I told her I was all right. She said, "I know that now." And she hugged me again, quicker this time, more a press than a hold, like a stamp on an envelope you are sure will arrive because the address is written in a hand that has been writing the same names for years without misspelling them. She left me with the soft clap of the door closing and the smell of her shampoo lingering like the end of a hymn. I stood for a minute with my hand on the frame, and then I turned to the work of finishing something that had waited too long. In the garage, the light through the high window made a bright stripe across the old concrete. Dust turned lazy in it. The bench still had my vise bolted to it, the paint worn to bare metal where I had clamped and unclamped 1,000 problems until they gave. On the shelf above the pegboard, the picture of Ellen leaned against a gas can like a friend stopping by for a quick talk and staying an hour. I lifted it, wiped the glass with the same rag I had used on the toolbox, and set it where it ought to be, on the little oak ledge I had made from scrap the year Mark turned 8, and insisted he be allowed to repaint his bicycle with flames. I looked up at the pegboard. The outlines I had traced around each tool were still ghosted there in pencil. Wrench, driver, mallet, pliers, spaces that used to mean order, now just memory. I stood on the threshold of that room that had saved me once and left me with enough to keep going. I let the smell of old oil and rubber and sun-warmed wood take me back to all the mornings I had unlocked that door, and thought, today, I will fix something that matters. I walked to the back wall, found the brass key on its nail by touch, and turned to face it all. The bench, the board, the stools, the stains that had outlived 3 landlords. The window that made rectangles of evening on the floor every winter. The hook where I used to hang the bag with Ellen's lunch when she forgot it on purpose, so she would have an excuse to come down and see me. I took a breath and another. Then I walked to the big roll-up and placed my hand on the handle and lowered it slowly, letting it come down with the kind of quiet you earn by keeping the tracks greased for decades. At the last foot of travel, the door began to chatter like it always did. I rested my palm flat against it, and the chattering stopped. The last 12 inches lowered with dignity. The latch clicked home. I turned the key in the side lock and felt the bolt slide into the hole with the crispness that tells you a thing is aligned. I whispered then a habit my wife taught me when she was alive, and I have not unlearned because it still works. Justice served, dignity intact. No courtroom had heard the case. No jury foreman had stood to read a verdict. It had taken a pen and patience and a refusal to be erased in rooms built on my money. It had taken a granddaughter's voice and an old friend's small courage. It had taken a toolbox empty to show me that sometimes the box is all a man is willing to give you, and sometimes that is the kindest truth you are going to get. I placed Ellen's photograph on the shelf above the bench, not because she had needed the symbol, but because I did. She smiled at the air, and at me, and at the wall, and at whatever passes for afternoon where she is now. I put my knuckles on the bench where the vise had worn the wood smooth, and I let all the days behind me stack themselves where they belong, not as a burden, as a foundation. In the quiet that followed, the garage did not go empty. It filled with the sound of a clock from 2 rooms away, keeping time like a stubborn friend. It filled with the image of my granddaughter walking through a city street someday, using money I had given her to make a building that knew how to welcome a person without asking them to dress their story in something it did not own. It filled with the breath of a man who was not less because his son had not learned how to hold the weight of honor. It filled with a sense that the road ahead, whatever color it turned out to be, would meet me where I stood if I kept standing. I left the garage by the side door and locked it behind me. The key went back on its nail. The hallway smelled like soap and old paint. In the kitchen, the light shifted along the table to find the places my hands had touched 100 times. The toolbox on the shelf kept its simple sentry. The phone on the counter had the gray stillness of a lake before wind. The clock did what clocks do. It moved forward without permission. Evening walked in. I ate what was easy and washed the plate. I put the mug on the rack to dry. I sat for a minute in the chair that knows my back and let the day sit in the other chair and catch its breath. I did not replay the hotel door. I did not rewatch a single video. I did not rehearse the speech I would give if another knock came. I let the engine idle down, then stop. I listened to the cooling clicks inside it. I took that as a sign. Before bed, I went down the hall and looked at the shelf where the red box sat. I told it thank you for doing the job it had to do today. I passed my fingers over the handle once and let it be. I turned off the lamp. The room settled. Somewhere out there, my son would be writing his version and reading it to himself until it sounded like truth. Somewhere out there, Pauline would be deciding what kind of woman she meant to be when the chairs were put away. Somewhere out there, Aaron would be paying his own debts in a way that did not require receipts. Somewhere out there, Emily would be sleeping with her phone on the nightstand and a trust in her name that no one could touch. In here, I turned off the last light and let the house breathe one more time before sleep. The maples outside rubbed their leaves together like 2 old men agreeing that the day had been long enough. I lay down and pulled the sheet over my chest. I thought of Italy for a second, not as a promise a boy had made to a father, but as a coast that exists whether a man sees it or not. I thought of blue and how many shades of it a sky can hold. I thought of the quiet I had earned by telling the truth out loud. Then I closed my eyes and let morning come on its own. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.